You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube. The Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, we were hearing from Metin about how, based on his criteria, some gorillas seem to be human, because his definitions of what is a human are actually just special pleading to make them not apes. Things are going to continue in a similar vein today, so here he is.
Now, you can't just trust the word man when they throw it in, like they did with Nutcracker Man. I think it was an ape.
So does everyone else, and Cro-Magnon is just Homo sapiens.
As I understand anatomy. But what about Cro-Magnon Man? We might begin by how big a cranial capacity? About 200 cc's more than most modern humans do have. So he's no lightweight when it comes to brain size. Look at the orbits of the eye. Are they round goggle eyes or are they more oval? It's really the more oval appearance, isn't it, right in here?
Ah, so like gorillas, it doesn't have the ape-shaped eyes. Which, just to be clear, most non-ape primates have, making most primates apes, I guess? See how this just doesn't work?
And look at the nasal bones, how nicely they protrude. And the face is pretty much perpendicular to the zygomatic arch, which would be right in this area. It's broken, but it was right in here. Everything put together, curvature of the forehead, no question human, but for me, the real clincher comes from cultural evidence. We have loads of cultural evidence for Cro-Magnon Man, tools and things of that nature.
Yes, we do. There's a reason that Cro-Magnon isn't used in the literature anymore. There's really no way to distinguish what was once called Cro-Magnon from just regular old Homo sapiens. And that's what they were. But let's check out our real criteria for apedom that isn't just a pile of obvious special pleading. We'll start with the plesiomorphic traits. Now if you want to go into these further, I suggest watching episode 1 of this series. They have vertebrae, 4 limbs. We can't say for sure about fingernails or a placenta, but given they're just humans, it would be pretty shocking if they didn't have those. They have enclosed orbits, so we know they're primates. Being Homo sapiens, they had noses with nostrils that opened down rather than to the side. We know they had the dental formula 2123. They have Y5 molars. They have a barrel-shaped chest, a ventral foramen magnum, extremely so in this case, as well as that super flexible shoulder joint. Looks like all the things that make apes apes are present in Cro-Magnon, and hence in Homo sapiens. So while I agree with the doctor that these are humans, which is also the general consensus, they are also, obviously, apes.
So, unquestionably human. You see, you can tell a difference.
What difference? The difference that makes them human? Sure you can, but that's not telling you that they aren't apes. We never actually got the criteria from Metin as to what an ape is. I had to supply that, and guess what? They meet all the criteria for apes. Granted, they don't meet the criteria for being chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, or gibbons, but the claim isn't that humans are the same species as those other extant apes, but that they all evolved from a common ape ancestor, and are all apes.
I'm not suggesting that there weren't humans who maybe even at the time of the flood particularly, who had very poor nutrition. We certainly see evidence of that in human fossils we find. Bones that were broken and rather massive bones to resist forces put on them. So,
if you know where he's going with this bit, put it in the comments because I don't have a clue.
You may find some skulls that are difficult to call, but then there are other things in the body to look at too. By and large, it's pretty easy to separate the apes from the humans.
Is it? Because I noticed that we went straight from Australopithecus and Paranthropus to Homo sapiens. We didn't touch on the vast majority of Homo, like Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, Homo georgicus, Homo ergaster, etc. You know, the ones that form a smooth transition right from Australopithecus to late and modern Homo. Weird, isn't it? Is it perhaps because if we touched on all of those, it might be too obvious that we can't simply draw some line in the middle of the hominids and say that one side is apes and the other side is non-ape humans? I mean, it's a well-known fact that even the same creationist on different days doesn't draw the line in the same place. Everyone at AIG should take after Kent in saying this.
What I believe is dumb.
So what are the 3 ways to make an ape man? Here you go, the whole purpose of the visit. First of all, you can combine fossils from apes and from humans, the two separate, ape and human, put them together, call it one individual, And you have an ape man.
Something that has literally never happened with one exception of no known fraud. Piltdown Man. And guess who discovered it was a fraud? Not creationists, it was the scaly evolutionist, atheist, baby-eating, godless scientists.
Now, that could be done intentionally, of course. Somebody who had a devious intent. Could very easily be done inadvertently because these fossils are usually scattered about and you're picking up pieces here and there. Lucy was picked up in 2 different years, picked up parts.
Gee, good thing that real paleontologists actually cared to document where the fossils were found in situ, and then later also to check the joints for matching articulation to avoid the possibility. You do that, and in most cases you can even tell how many individuals of the same species there are, even with fragmentary remains. Never mind how many species there are. Do people not think that real scientists have ever considered that there might be difficulties in their own field and that those scientists might have actually come up with solutions to fix those potential problems?
Years, picked up parts to put together what became Lucy. And you can't tell in every case whether you've got more than one individual or only one, unless you get 2 bones that are, she'd only have 1. You get 2 left arm bones up here, that would suggest 2 individuals.
If you have both ends of any joint, you can tell. And if there are only 1 or fewer skeletons worth of bone associated, then there's no reason to think that you just happen to find 2 separate specimens. And when I say an association, we're sometimes talking about partial articulation. So unless this was a human and an ape running at each other and colliding so hard that their skeletons combined, this is just not a plausible idea. Further, note how this is basically the only place we hear creationists complaining about this possibility. None of them are worried that maybe a sauropod find was actually 2 different sauropods of 2 different families that got jumbled up and associated with each other. Why is that? Well, of course it's because creationists don't really care much about most animals. They don't really care to say that some one particular species of sauropod is a distinct creation, the way they do with humans. But they also know that if all the hominin finds are authentic, then there's really no clear way to draw the line between apes and humans. So one of their only options is to say that the hominins are actually not real organisms. They're accidental chimeras. But you add to this the problem that none of the individual bones of these animals is just identical to humans or basal apes, but that each individual bone itself is a mosaic of derived and basal traits. And even if it were true that scientists had chimerical hominins, which it's almost certainly not, it still wouldn't help the creationists because they're still faced with individual bones that are just as transitional as the whole species when combined.
Now, another way to make an ape man is to find humans in the fossil record. They're very rare, but try to find something about them that you can say is ape-like.
Well, that's easy. Literally everything about a human is ape-like, because humans are just apes.
Okay. And so there you're taking a human demoting to an ape level.
That makes just as much sense as saying you're going to demote a human to a mammal level or a vertebrate level. These aren't ranks of awesomeness with humans sitting at the top. These are simple classifications to which humans obviously and demonstrably belong. Biologists aren't making a tier list of animal taxa, at least not as a serious scientific endeavor. This isn't Tier Zoo, it's an actual science that doesn't make value judgments, just tries to describe as accurately as possible the way things are, and then use theories to predict future data. And the fact that humans are apes, combined with the theory of evolution, does that handily.
And this is the most common of all. You find apes in the fossil record and you try to upscale them to say there's this or that feature that allows them to be promoted to being closer to humans or human.
I mean, yeah, that's how you know you've got a hominin. Traits like reduced canines, more parabolic tooth rows, terrestrial bipedality, increased brain size, the reduction in brow ridge size, etc. are all morphological indicators of being closer to humans than to non-human apes. And note that Minton hasn't really done anything to indicate that these animals don't have the intermediate traits. He's just found some arbitrary characteristics of modern ape sapiens that they lack, and then used special pleading to say that therefore they're not humans, which no one said they were, and that they're apes, which no one has disputed, and that therefore they're not evidence of evolution of humans among the apes, which does not follow in any way.
Let's look at all 3. Combining men and apes, that was done with Piltdown Man.
And never again.
That was a model that was widely sold. I had a faculty colleague at Washington University School of Medicine that had one of these on her desk.
Tell them stories that don't go anywhere. Like the time I caught the ferry over to Shelbyville. I needed a new
I think she was well aware, as we are today, that Piltdown Man was a hoax.
Which is what they called Shelbyville in those days. So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time. Now, to take the ferry.
We're not sure who did it. Everybody's got some ideas. There have been several books written on Piltdown Man.
Pictures of bumblebees on them. Give me 5 P's for a quarter, you'd say.
Gets its
Now,
name
where
from
were
having
we?
been found in a
Oh,
quarry
yeah.
in Piltdown,
The
England, not
important
far
thing
really
was-
from Darwin's home. This was back in 1912 near Sussex, England, or in Sussex. I spoke at Sussex University some years ago. It's the only time I've had my life threatened while on the stage.
I don't believe him. I don't think that happened. If anyone has evidence that it did, please let me know.
They don't take too kindly to having Darwin critiqued at Sussex.
Is it that, or is it that they don't like being obviously lied to? It's probably a coincidence that the name Menton sounds like mendacious, but also might not be a coincidence.
They dated this Piltdown man and were pretty confident that it would come out at 300,000 years.
Kind of. At the time, they did not have any reliable absolute clocks that worked well enough to measure the age of Piltdown Man in anything close to a direct manner, and instead, they were using opposing chronologies of when the Pleistocene started. There were long, short, and in-between chronologies, with the in-between ones being reasonably popular, and this is where the 300,000-year estimate for Piltdown Man comes from. This was based itself on where the fossil was reportedly found. But once real dating techniques were invented, it was found that the human skull was probably more like 800 years old, and the orangutan jaw was a bit younger than that. Of course, what people who were basing dates on mostly guesswork from rough stratigraphic estimates without the benefit of radioisotopic dating said about when things lived or occurred doesn't really matter much here in the year of our Lord 2023 when I'm writing this. Further, of course, Piltdown Man is not part of the modern scientific picture of human ancestry, specifically because it's known to have been a fraud. And even before that was conclusively demonstrated, it was on the outs of the scientific community because all the progress in hominin evolution was coming out of Africa, not England. If you want to say that part of the reason that the current scientific understanding of human ancestry is wrong is chimerical fake animals, you have to show that the actually currently accepted animals are chimerical, whether by fraud or mistake. Pointing to Piltdown Man doesn't do that. This isn't an argument. Further, since hoaxes apparently mean that something isn't true, let's look at some creationist hoaxes, like the Delk print, which was obviously carved and even other creationists don't take it seriously anymore, but which many of them used to tout as evidence of humans living alongside dinosaurs before the flood, and the Paluxy tracks contain the tracks of humans and dinosaurs running from the floodwaters. Or hey, how about in 1993 when creationists ran a whole documentary about the Ark having finally been found, except it was all a hoax by George Jamal to expose their sloppy fact-checking, and it was such an obvious fraud that the wood he gave the creationists claiming it came from the Ark was actually soaked in teriyaki sauce to age it, and still smelled of the sauce. If we're going to measure these ideas by hoaxes that have fooled their proponents, then creationism will not be coming out on top.
And anyone, of course, who would disagree with that would be dismissed as a science denier.
Not true. There was skepticism over the find from the start. For one thing, because it was found in a gravel pit, not the kind of place you'd normally find such a fossil.
So you got that figure in mind, 300,000 years? It turned out that the skull was, in fact, a human skull, one with a very large cranial capacity. And it was a modern skull, but by modern, we don't mean 2020 or something like that. We're talking about a skull from probably the 13 or 1400s when the plagues went through Europe and wiped out, some say, over half the population. We're kind of familiar with plagues these days, aren't we? I used to give this lecture a few years ago, and nobody thought too much about them. Now with COVID, we do think about it.
Well, maybe he should have thought about it more instead of working for an anti-vax organization than dying during said plague.
There were so many people who had died, there was no place to bury them. So they put people, bodies into caves and into culverts and quarries and any place they could find to put them. It's believed that the skull was that source. And then the mandible, the jawbone here, was from a very modern orangutan.
The sources I've found actually say that the orangutan jaw was also pretty old, but I don't really see how that matters.
And it had some molars that came with it, that were part of it. And then it had a chimp canine tooth. So this was quite a collection.
It was remarked on early in the history of the fossil, before the fraud was even demonstrated, that the jaw was remarkably like that of an orangutan or chimp, which, flatly contradicts Menton's assertion that anyone who questioned the authenticity of the find was ostracized.
We had a human skull, orangutan molar, and chimp canine tooth. And guess what? I've got the whole gang here for you today to show you who was put together to make. First of all, here is a conception of what the skull might have looked like.
Cool, a reconstruction of a fake taxon. I'm not here to talk about Piltdown Man, since it has zero part to play in current paleoanthropology except as a cautionary tale. But hey, let's talk about a couple more frauds in creationism. What about the time Carl Baugh claimed that he had been raising piranha in a hyperbaric tank and that they grew to enormous size, even though what he actually had in his tank were ordinary-sized pacu, a related but distinct group of fish? Somehow, I don't think it's plausible that Carl didn't notice the difference between the herbivorous pacu and the voraciously carnivorous piranha when it came time for feeding his high-pressure fish. Hey, let's talk about the Ica-stones, which are known modern forgeries. The forger admitted as much and demonstrated his techniques on camera, yet still, creationists use their absurd, cartoonish, and inaccurate dinosaurs to say that humans and Mesozoic reptiles coexisted in pre-Columbian Peru. See what I mean when I say that creationists probably shouldn't be using credulity on fake fossil hoaxes as a big dig on science, given their own track record of accepting just about anything fake that even vaguely hints at their ideas being right, despite the obviousness of the hoaxes? It's this thing called projection. Anyway, we're skipping the whole discussion on Piltdown Man.
Well, I'm glad Piltdown Man's out of the way, and I think there could be many other examples where parts have been mixed with human and non-human parts, whether intentional or not.
Cool, but there's literally zero indication that that's true. So until creationists put in a whole lot more legwork on paleoanthropology, it's not something anyone needs to take seriously. Without evidence, this is on the same level as just saying that Satan put the fossils in the ground to test your faith.
What about making apes out of humans? That was done with Neanderthal man.
And, every human who ever lived, because humans are apes.
Before we even begin, let's just look at Neanderthal man's skull. I have a replica of a Neanderthal skull. It's not a generalized Neanderthal skull, it's a specific one. This particular one didn't have a mandible. But we have lots of Neanderthal skeletons, enough that every bone in the body can be accounted for, including this little tiny bone under here called the hyoid bone. Can't see it, the jaw's in the way.
Yep, as it stands now, the Neanderthal skeleton is extremely well known. Who wants to bet that he'll complain about early reconstructions of Neanderthal before it was so well known? As if science should be able to get everything right every time before the data even come in. And it's bad that science actually seeks to correct past ideas in light of evidence that those ideas do not match the data.
So, let's just apply our criteria that you learned. What about cranial capacity, first of all, compared to modern man? We're not going to do a measurement, just take a look. What would you say?
It's certainly bigger than Homo sapiens. Of course, as has already been pointed out, someone among the apes had to have the biggest brain, and while among extant apes it's H. sapiens, in the past it was another species. Just like gorillas are the heaviest apes among living apes, but were in the past surpassed by Gigantopithecus. But do you think H. neanderthalensis had the actual characteristics used to set apes apart from other monkeys? Of course it did. And since we have yet to get a definition of ape from anyone but me, and my definition is actually in line with what real taxonomists look at when deciding if any animal is an ape, for the sake of this discussion at least, we can be well assured that no matter how much like modern humans Neanderthals were, they remained solidly within the ape category.
Bigger, same size, or smaller? Bigger, sure, bigger. That doesn't mean he was smarter, but we're not looking at an ape brain here. That's what I really want to get across.
What I want to get across is that in no way makes it not an ape brain.
For a big skull, what about the zygomatic arch? I can get 2 fingers, but not 3 in there.
Oh, so significantly bigger than when he couldn't get 2 of his sausage fingers through the human zygomatic. So it looks like even on his own criteria, at least in terms of zygomatic arches, it's not so clear that Neanderthals are humans or not.
When you're taking a little skull like this one, look at the size of that arch for a much smaller creature compared to the human. See the differences, how major they are.
I don't see that, in fact. They're considerably more similar than are the chimpanzees and H. sapiens zygomatic arch in terms of the size of the temporalis muscle, which they would allow. But again, the size of temporalis muscles is not used to diagnose membership in hominoidea by anyone outside the context of creationists, special pleading for humans not to be part of the group. Because, as I've said, they need humans to be the special boys of creation.
What about the protruding nasal bones, you might say? Well, wait a minute, I notice that's a light color. That would be something they didn't find for this particular skull. Well, as I say, a lot of other fossils have been found of Neanderthal had a very nice protruding nasal bone. And look at that nasal spine. Why, you just couldn't get more perfect than that.
It's like Homo sapiens and H. neanderthalensis were sister species or something.
What about the slope of the face? Pretty much perpendicular to the cheekbone. The forehead is curved.
Oh, this time we're putting our hands across the top of the frontal bones and not the orbits like with the previous non-H sapiens hominids. Good to know we're still being blatantly dishonest.
And the orbits are not goggle-type orbits. They're a little broader than tall.
Oh, like this gorilla, but unlike, say, this howler monkey skull. It's almost like orbit roundness is still a bad way to judge if a primate is an ape.
Everything on here, except for maybe the length of the skull, kind of a bun on the back here, and these brow ridges would be just typical human.
Gee, that's a funny way to say that Neanderthals are not simply modern humans.
But we have modern humans that have a more elongate skull, and we certainly have modern humans that have a distinct brow ridge, like the Australian Aboriginals.
But do we have any modern humans with the occipital bun Menton mentioned? Or that lack a chin like the Neanderthals? No, we don't. Also, here's the skull of a native Australian. Those brow ridges are more prominent than in most modern humans, but are still substantially smaller than in a Neanderthal.
So, and lots of cultural artifacts. Arguably even a cosmetics kit. They found a couple of scallop shells that had been hinged with burials of Neanderthals. And by the way, they appeared to have had burial customs. Bodies were in positions consistent with intentional burying.
That has been disputed, but then modern humans have had a huge variety of funerary practices, ranging from cannibalism to cremation, ground burial to sky burial, etc. Not all of them would leave obvious paleontological evidence. So even if the evidence of Neanderthal burial ends up not indicating intentional burial, I don't actually think that makes Neanderthals less like modern humans, since that's not universal to modern humans.
But inside these scallop shells were pigments, different pigments, some of them kind of metallic pigments.
I don't think that there's any serious dispute that Neanderthals had a complex culture and a high degree of cognitive ability.
So lots of tools, artwork, you name it. But what did the evolutionists do with it?
Accept the evidence that Neanderthals were intelligent and sophisticated animals. Oh wait, he means what did scientists do before that evidence came in? Well, since the evidence wasn't in, they reached some wrong conclusions. But then they did that thing that science does, and that creationists don't do as a rule. Correct previous erroneous ideas in the light of new evidence.
That's supposed to be Neanderthal man. Now, you run into that fellow, you might be a little scared.
So this picture is from the middle of the last century, probably about 1960, but it seems that the exact date that it was painted is unclear. The clamshell that may have been used for cosmetic purposes was reported on in 2010. Just like I predicted, Menton is going to whine that people didn't have the ability to see the future when reconstructing Neanderthals.
He's pretty frightening. Even his wife over here is kind of frightening looking, isn't she? Even the kids are ugly.
I don't know. I try not to judge other species on the basis of Homo sapiens' beauty standards, but whatever.
It was painted up to produce this more bestial looking human being.
Other than portraying them as hairy, I honestly don't see what makes this bestial. These animals are shown using tools, wearing clothes, cooperating together, having families. Now, given that Neanderthals spent tens of thousands of years in places like Europe, I'd say they probably had lighter skin than is depicted here. But is Menton saying that he thinks dark skin is bestial? I sure hope not, but it's the only thing other than hair that I can see that seems like an obviously questionable aspect of the portrayal of Neanderthals here. But don't worry, guys. There's only one human race, and AIG tells you so there's no chance they're secretly racist.
But we don't need to guess on Neanderthal. And by the way, they say they split off from humans about 700,000 years ago. Recent genetic studies have shown that they're well within the range of variability of modern humans.
Citation needed. There are no such studies at all. In fact, every single study that has been done on Neanderthal DNA has shown that they nest outside of modern human variability, and that they are a sister group to all extant humans. In fact, this is such a big problem that notable whiny bitch Nathaniel Jeanson has taken to pretending that Neanderthal genomic data is too degraded to take seriously. Of course, the problem with that is that if it were as degraded as he says, then the consensus genome couldn't actually be constructed, because the fragments of the Neanderthal genome would be too small to be reliably sequenced. But they can be. Menton is so wrong that even his own colleagues don't agree with him here. It's always fun when Answers in Genesis can't figure out its own positions on this. Menton says Neanderthals are actually inside Homo sapiens diversity. Every actual study says that they are not. Jeanson says that we can't know because the DNA is too degraded, which it's not. Pick a lane, Kenham.
And many evolutionists do consider Neanderthal to simply be Homo sapiens.
Not in decades, and it was the genomic data that conclusively slammed the door shut on Neanderthals just being a subspecies of Homo sapiens.
By the way, show you how this becomes a game. One of the ways you can tell one skull from another is like this, is because it's printed right on the jaw here, right on the mandible. And I'll read it. Homo sapiens, ever heard of it? You think, well, it's just Homo sapiens. Subspecies Neanderthalensis.
Ooh, he got a skull replica before the genomic data came in, and as a result, the replica maker included a then reasonable label. But then science did what it does, and it took new data into account, finding that the designation is no longer reasonable. Apparently, learning more things means that the whole endeavor of science is stupid. Just accept that it's all magic and sit down.
So they put a subspecies in. Ours is Homo sapiens sapiens. Today, if you buy the same skull from the same company, Samso in Germany, that same skull will read Homo neanderthalensis.
Hooray for the advancement of knowledge.
So they have demoted Neanderthal to a different species.
Demoted? The only reason to use that language is that you're a chauvinist who thinks that all other species are lower than you simply by virtue of being other species. Science isn't here to tell you which species is the highest ranking. Putting Neanderthals in their own species isn't an indictment of their intrinsic worth as a group. It's an acknowledgement that they are a genetically and morphologically distinct group that is outside the morphological and genetic range of any other group.
I don't think there's enough difference to even consider it a racial difference.
Cool, everyone who looks at the data disagrees, and Menton was a known liar and idiot. And in case it comes up, don't bother telling me not to speak ill of the dead. I speak truthfully of the dead. If a person was a garbage person in life, that doesn't change in death. Menton spent his time at AIG misinforming people who trusted him, helping boost false medical information, and lying about anatomy. I don't care that he's dead, it doesn't change who he chose to be. I'm not happy he's dead, but I'm not going to pretend he was a good person. He demonstrably was not.
Okay, what does the whole body look like? On the right there, you see two views of Neanderthal man. One's straight forward and one is from the side. And there's a third Neanderthal specimen over to the left here. This one is included to show, see how the knees are bent? And over here, the knees are straight. That's a subtle thing. You visit a museum, you'd never notice this. You wouldn't think twice about what's going on. But let me just give you a quick little lesson on knees of apes versus humans. Probably never thought about it a lot.
Okay, my prediction, and keep in mind that while I do script these, I do it as I go, so I don't actually know what he's going to say for certain. But my prediction is that he's going to talk about the valgus condition of the human knee and not mention that Australopithecus had the same condition, despite him thinking that they're just apes.
When apes walk, check it out. They don't walk the way we do, even when they walk on two legs, and no ape can do more than about 30% of its walking on two legs.
Except for hominins.
Mostly they want to get down and be digitigrade.
I'm sorry, what? Digitigrade apes. Apes that walk up on their toes like a dog. There has never been any such thing. Did Menton, the anatomist, just not know what digitigrade means? See what I mean about him having been an idiot?
Apes can't straighten their legs out, so their knees are bent like this at all time. Make this a little experiment. The rest of your visit at the museum today, walk around with your knees just slightly bent. Don't worry, people know you were in my class, so it won't be a problem. A little bent. Boy, will you get tired. You'll just be begging to straighten those legs out.
Morphologically distinct organisms have different habitual modes of locomotion. More at 10.
That's one of the reasons apes don't walk very long on two legs. I mean, it requires a tremendous amount of effort because they can't straighten their knee. Here's a little experiment you can do too. Sit in a chair and then kick your feet out like you're going to put them on a footstool. If you're totally relaxed and you kick your feet out, your feet go from this position when they're down to pointing out. Have you noticed that? They point out a little bit. Even our footprints, don't they point out? Just a little bit, they're not parallel. It looks funny if you walk, I'll try this, with your toes straight forward, doesn't it? Our feet are just a little bit out. That sets a lock in the knee. Very quickly sets a lock. As a result, we can stand at attention for hours.
Okay, time for a public safety announcement. Do not stand at attention with your knees locked. That's how you pass out. I am an actual military veteran, and that's one of the first things that you learn about standing at attention.
Because our knees are locked. As soon as we bend our knee, ever have somebody while you're standing at attention sneak up behind you and clip you right behind the knee?
I wasn't at attention, but my knees were locked, and a sea turtle did it in Hawaii. Does that count?
You can go down like a ton of brick. because they've unset the lock and you weren't ready. Think of it, when you're running, every time your leg straightens out for the next stride, that foot rotates outward about 5 degrees, and the turning is not at the ankle itself, but at the knee.
I don't want to pull out the Grandpa Simpson meme again, but let's get to a damn point.
So we have a little bit of movement right here at the knee. And so we're setting the lock, releasing the lock, setting it, releasing it as we're running. Well, our body's got so many things that are amazing. If we had a month, I couldn't even begin to exhaust things that are amazing about the human body.
He's exhausting me, and this video hasn't even run an hour, never mind a month.
Here's another piece of evidence that's interesting. You've heard of these forensic experts that can take a skeleton.
Oh, okay, he didn't bother to talk about how this differs from other hominins, in his opinion, which, would be sort of important to the point. I guess I'll do it for him. Here's an Australopithecus knee. Notice how the angle of the processes where it connects to the lower leg at the knee are at an angle so that for the knee to sit straight, it forces the femur to come in from the wider hips. This condition is called valgus, and it is an adaptation to habitual or obligatory bipedalism, because it allows the weight of the body to be directed straight down on the knee while only one leg is supporting the body, such as during a stride. If you find that knee, it's a definitive indication of a biped, and Australopithecus has that knee. If this is a factor that makes something human, then guess what? All the things science says are closer to humans than chimps have this human characteristic, including Australopithecus, Paranthropus, Ardipithecus, and early Homo.
This is a plastic skeleton, but if it were real, they could take a skeleton like this and flesh it out and give you some idea what it looked like when it was alive.
Yep, forensic reconstruction is pretty cool.
This is how they've identified murder victims and what have you.
Oh, suddenly forensic science, which is what AIG would call historical science, is good science. Weird how they like to cherry pick that.
Used to be very laborious. They would sort of make clay, and they knew the temporalis fit right in this red area, so they would attach it there. It would sort of add the muscles and then put a skin over. Now it's done with computers. There was a guy named Jay Matterns who did the reconstruction you're seeing before you now. On the left, a close-up, and the right, more of a body shot of the same individual. Would fit in today if he were dressed the same way. His body generally is identical. There are some distinctive features. I'll point out a few. The brow ridge.
Oh, distinctive features. Hey, that's the kind of thing a species has. Neat.
But we know Australian Aboriginals have those.
Not to nearly the same extent. But hey, why not just lie about modern groups of humans to prop up your absurd conspiracy theories about evolutionary biology and paleoanthropology?
A little bit lower forehead than we normally would see.
Yeah, because of the entirely different brain case shape, with H. sapiens having a globular brain and H. neanderthalensis having more of a lemon-shaped brain. That's kind of a big difference, and certainly not within the modern range of human diversity like Menton mentioned mendaciously.
People have a little bit higher forehead, but again, large cranial capacity made up for in the length of the skull.
That's true.
Based on the face and the body, as a human anatomist, I'd say indistinguishable from Homo sapiens.
Weird then how both species have a suite of both cranial and postcranial characteristics that define them such that, given sufficiently intact remains, there is no significant ambiguity about to which group a find belongs. And I mean, just look at these skeletons, dear audience. You tell me in the comments if you think these skeletons are indistinguishable.
And that is indeed what it is. Add that to a lot of cultural evidence, and we're pretty well home free on Neanderthal being a human.
I mean, if you want to have a broad definition of human, then sure. If you mean anatomically modern Homo sapiens, then absolutely not. And I suspect that that is what he actually meant, especially since he lied about Neanderthals being indistinguishable from modern humans, and being entirely within modern human diversity, both genetically and morphologically.
Probably lived at the time of the flood or so and got fossilized. Not very many humans got fossilized. Not many primates in general got fossilized.
Interestingly, no. Primates, parasodactyls, artiodactyls, rodents, bats, carnivorans, etc. You see, Andrew Snelling is the one who set the general consensus around the flood boundary for answers in Genesis, and he places the boundary at the end of the Cretaceous. So, interestingly, no modern mammal families are found in that alleged flood rock. This means that all the Neanderthals that have been found would, according to AIG, be post-flood, not pre-flood or mid-flood individuals. That means they have to be descended from one of Noah's sons. But the tricky thing is that when the Y chromosome of Neanderthals is sequenced, it's recovered as a sister lineage to all extant Homo sapiens Y chromosomes. But AIG themselves already have said that they have figured out which groups of human Y chromosomes come from each of Noah's sons, and that none of them are Neanderthal lineages. So unless Noah had a secret cousin or something who snuck on the Ark, this just doesn't work. I can't make this clear enough. The bare existence of Neanderthals on its own precludes the entirety of Nathaniel Jeanson's attempts to find support for the Bible in the human genome. And they do this regardless of whether or not Neanderthals are the same species as modern humans, which again, they're not.
In the flood. What about that brow ridge, though? Does that kind of bother you a bit?
No. What about a prominent brow ridge should bother anyone?
Let me show you another Neanderthal. We've got so many, they have boys and girls and adults, different ages.
And the existence of so many Neanderthal individuals that have been examined by paleoanthropologists means that we have lots of data to make the conclusion that H. neanderthalensis is not a variety of H. sapiens.
Here's, I think, a 13 or 14-year-old Neanderthal girl that was fleshed out from the skeleton. If she were sitting in here today, would I notice anything unusual? She might have run a comb through her hair or something like that. You know, I've looked at that picture, and the only thing I can see that might get a little bit of attention is the lips are a little full.
The lack of a chin might give it away too, but also remember that juveniles of all apes look more similar to each other than do the adult forms. Pointing this out with H. sapiens and H. neanderthalensis doesn't really do anything to tell us how distinct they are. We already know that they're extremely closely related, and so we'd expect their children to be even more similar than the already very similar but still distinct adults. Further, if the children were indistinguishable, as Menton seems to imply, then how did this girl get identified as a Neanderthal? She must have been distinct in order to get that designation.
But do we have lip bones so we can look at bones and decide how big the lips should be?
No, but we do have muscle attachment points for the lips on the skull, so we still have a good way to estimate how big lips would be. But I also don't really think that the lips are as big a deal as, say, having an occipital bun or not having a chin, which would also set this girl apart.
I mean, if I were to tell you, boy, you should have seen this guy when he was alive, the lips were out here, you'd have no way of disproving it except to say that's pretty unlikely.
Or, you know, looking at the muscle attachment points. But hey, who cares about human anatomy when you're a human anatomist?
So you really can't... they had to put something in to make her look a little different. And I might notice that deer hide dress she has there. That's kind of unusual.
So we won't actually look at any significant anatomical differences between modern humans and Neanderthals that might be evident in this juvenile female Neanderthal. Thanks for wasting my damn time, Menton.
Okay, what about making men out of apes? Here is an ape, Australopithecus afarensis. We've already looked at the skull. All of its features, huge zygomatic arch, sloped face, flat forehead, everything.
But not that foramen magnum. That's intermediate between modern humans and basal apes, and that demonstrates, on its own, without the pelvis or knees, that Australopithecus, as a genus, was bipedal. Let's not talk about that, though.
This is an ape.
Still true, still uncontested.
The hips are ape-like.
Interestingly, here's an Australopithecus hip, a pan hip, and a human hip. While they're all certainly ape hips, it's pretty obvious which two are the most similar, and it's not pan on Australopithecus.
And there are many other features, too.
Yes, being a whole organism, Australopithecus afarensis sure did have many features.
So where did it come from? It was discovered by a team led by Donald Johanson in Ethiopia back in 1974. And it has been dated at 3 million years old, but there have been all kinds of dates all over the place.
Interesting. I'm sure we're about to get some examples of those data, complete with citations for studies that came up with them, right?
On Lucy, I don't accept the dates at all.
Well, this series is already going to be long enough. I don't think we have time to do a whole section on dating techniques, and so I think that's where we'll end it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, hit the like button. If you didn't, tell me what you didn't like in the comments and hit the dislike button. Either way, I hope you hit the subscribe button and use the bell icon to turn on all notifications so you're always alerted when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Ben Tovand, Tapioca Weasel, Cynically Skeptic, Denny5252, Elderon Teller, Farava, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babbity, San, Sphincter of Doom, and the Venerable Bede. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if the annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.